Picture this. You are standing in a town square baked by a relentless, unforgiving sun. The air is thick with the smell of dry dust, sweat, and something acrid, something burning. Before you, a young woman is bound to a thick wooden post, her simple cotton dress already stained with soot at the hem. Her name is Alara, and her eyes, wide with a terror that has frozen beyond tears, are fixed on the small pile of kindling at her feet. A man in a fine waistcoat, Mayor Thorne, holds a torch aloft. His face is a mask of pious authority, but his eyes glitter with a possessive, cruel satisfaction. He has declared her a witch, a bringer of blight upon their crops, a temptress sent from the devil himself. But you know the truth. Her only crime was refusing to be his property, refusing to surrender her father's land and her own future into his greedy hands. The crowd murmurs, a low beast of fear and superstition. Their face is a mixture of morbid curiosity and genuine dread. They are good people, mostly, but they are people who have been starved by drought and fed a diet of lies by a powerful man. The torch descends. A single, hungry tongue of flame leaps from the oil-soaked rags and touches the dry wood, catches with a terrible whoosh. The heat washes over you. The flame begins to climb, a serpent of orange and red coiling toward the girl's feet. She flinches, a strangled gasp escaping her lips, her body straining against the rough ropes. This is it. The end of innocence. The triumph of darkness. But then, a voice cuts through the crackling of the fire and the fearful silence of the crowd. A voice not loud, but so deep and resonant with authority that it seems to shake the very ground. Stop! Every head turns. Parting the crowd like a ship cleaving the waves is a tall, solitary figure robed in the simple black of a clergyman. This is Father Silas, the town's priest, a man as remote and revered as the stone church he keeps. He is a man of peace, of quiet sermons and solitary prayer, rarely seen outside the sanctuary walls. Yet here he is, his face carved from granite, his eyes holding a storm of righteous fury that seems to eclipse the sun itself. A long, faded scar runs from his left ear to the corner of his mouth, a silent testament to a life lived before the cloth. Mayor Thorne sneers, lowering the torch but not extinguishing it. Father, this does not concern the church. This is a matter of civic justice. The woman is a witch. Silas does not stop his slow, deliberate advance until he stands between the mayor and the pyre. The heat from the growing fire flushes his pale skin, but he does not even blink. This is a matter of a human soul, Mayor, and that is always the concern of God and his church. You have held no trial. You have presented no evidence, only accusations born of your own thwarted desires. The accusation hangs in the air, sharp and undeniable. A ripple of doubt moves through the crowd. They respected the mayor's power, but they revered the Father's word. Thorne's face darkens with rage. Mind your place, priest, or you may find yourself accused of consorting with her. Silas's gaze sweeps over the townspeople, his eyes lingering on faces he recognized, faces he had offered comfort to in times of grief and hardship. Look at what you are doing, he says, his voice now softer, filled with a profound sadness. You are burning a child to appease a tyrant's vanity. Is this who you are? He turns his back on Thorne, an act of supreme dismissal, and walks directly to the pyre. The flames are now licking at the hem of Alara's dress. Without hesitation, he reaches into the fire, his hands pulling at the smoldering kindling, scattering the burning branches with his worn leather boots. He ignores the heat, ignores the licks of flame that singe his cassock. He pulls a small, sharp knife from a hidden sheath in his belt and with two swift, practiced motions, severs the ropes binding Alara's wrists. She slumps forward, overcome by smoke and terror, and he catches her, lifting her into his arms as if she weighed nothing at all. Her head rests against his shoulder, her breath coming in ragged, shallow sobs. He turns and faces the stunned mayor one last time. She is under my protection now, he declares, his voice ringing with the finality of a tolling bell. She claims the right of sanctuary. Harm her, and you declare war not on me, but on God himself. Thorne stood sputtering, his face purple with fury, the torch hanging uselessly in his hand. He could rule the town, but he could not command its soul, and in that moment, he saw that soul turning away from him. Father Silas, carrying the fragile body of the woman he had just saved from the fire, walked back through the now silent crowd and did not look back. The great oak doors of the stone church opened to receive them and then closed with a deep, echoing boom, shutting out the world and its casual cruelties. The air inside the church was cool and smelled of old stone, beeswax, and rain. It was a silence that felt ancient and profound, a stark contrast to the howling mob and crackling flames outside. Silas gently laid Ilara down on a long wooden pew in the narthex, his movements economical and sure. He fetched a basin of cool water from the vestry and a clean linen cloth, then knelt beside her. His hands, which had so easily scattered the burning embers, were now impossibly gentle as he dabbed at the angry red welts the ropes had left on her wrists and the minor burns on her ankles. Her dress was scorched, her face smudged with soot, but she was alive. Her breathing was still shallow, but evening out. Her eyes fluttered open, focusing on the vaulted stone ceiling above her, then on the solemn face of the man tending to her. "Why?" she whispered, her voice raspy from the smoke. "Why did you help me?" Silas dipped the cloth in the water again, his gaze fixed on his task. He didn't meet her eyes. "Because what they were doing was an abomination," he said, his voice a low rumble. "It was not God's justice. It was thorns for several days. The church was their entire world. The heavy doors remained barred, a silent declaration of defiance against the town and its corrupt leader. Outside, the world simmered. They could hear the occasional angry shout, the sound of a rock thrown against the thick walls. But Thorn did not dare stage an open assault on the holy ground. Not yet. Inside, a quiet routine bloomed in the stillness. Silas gave Ilara a small room off the chancel, once used for storing vestments, and it became her haven. They ate simple meals of bread, cheese, and vegetables from the small, walled garden behind the church, a patch of green that Silas tended with the same quiet devotion he gave to everything else. In the safety of those stone walls, Ilara's spirit, though bruised, began to mend. She told him her story in fits and starts, her words punctuated by long silences. She spoke of her parents, kind and hard-working people who had died in a sudden rockslide a year prior, an accident that had cleared the way for Thorn to claim their land. She spoke of the mayor's relentless proposals, each one more of a demand than a request, and her steadfast refusal. "My father built our home with his own hands," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "He said the land was our heart. Selling it would be like tearing my own heart out." Silas listened, his expression unchanging, but a muscle twitched in his jaw. He would often stand by the large stained-glass window depicting a shepherd protecting his flock from wolves, his hand unconsciously going to a silver locket he wore tucked beneath his cassock. He never opened it, but his fingers would trace its edges as if drawing strength from a hidden memory. He, in turn, began to reveal slivers of himself, not through stories, but through sentiment. One afternoon, as they were weeding the garden, Ilara noticed the intricate network of faded white scars on his knuckles. "You were not always a priest," she stated, more an observation than a question. He paused, his hands buried in the dark earth. He looked out over the stone wall, toward the distant, hazy mountains. "I once believed justice could be found at the end of a sword," he said softly. "I learned that violence only ever begets more violence. It creates a desert in the soul." He spoke of a time when the world had been different for him, a time of light and laughter that had been swallowed by a great darkness. He had come to this forgotten town, to this quiet church, to serve a silent penance, to forget the man he had been. He had sought peace in God's house, not another war. A fragile trust grew between them, nurtured by the shared silence and the unspoken understanding of their past griefs. He saw in her not a witch or a victim, but a survivor with a spirit as unyielding as the mountain stone. She saw in him not just a priest, but a man wrestling with his own ghosts, a protector who had awoken from a long slumber. They were two solitary souls who had found a strange, quiet refuge in one another. A small island of peace in a world that churned with malice just beyond the door. The hope that began to grow in the church's hallowed halls was as delicate and as precious as the first spring wildflower pushing its way through a late frost. That delicate peace was not destined to last. It was shattered by the sound of a hammering fist on the great oak doors. A storm had been gathering on the western horizon all afternoon, the sky turning a bruised purple-gray, and the wind had begun to howl around the corners of the old church, a mournful echo of the rising conflict. This time, it was not the superstitious mutterings of a cowed populace. This was the sharp, organized sound of authority. Alara, who had been sweeping the aisle, froze, the broom falling from her hands with a clatter. Silas was at her side in an instant, his hand on her shoulder, a silent gesture of reassurance. He moved to the small peephole in the door, his body tense. Outside, the world had transformed. Mayor Thorne was there, flanked not by frightened townspeople, but by a dozen hard-faced men, mercenaries with the dead eyes of those who sell their loyalty to the highest bidder. Thorne held up a scroll, its official red seal stark against the darkening sky. "Silas Blackwood," he bellowed, his voice carrying over the rising wind. He used the priest's surname, a deliberate act of stripping him of his holy office, reducing him to a mere man. "By the authority of the territorial governor, I have here a warrant for your arrest. You stand accused of obstructing justice, of heresy, and of harboring a condemned fugitive. Open these doors and surrender the witch, or we will take her, and you by force." Silas's face was grim. The law, a tool meant to protect the innocent, had been twisted into a weapon against them. "He will not stop," Alara whispered, her eyes wide with fear. "He will burn the whole world down to get what he wants." Silas turned from the door, his eyes scanning the cavernous sanctuary. For a moment, she saw a flicker of the old despair in his gaze, the weariness of a man who had fled one war only to find himself in the crosshairs of another. But then it was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. "Then he will find that this house is made of more than just stone and prayer," he said. He began to move with a speed and purpose that was startling. "The pews," he commanded, his voice crisp and clear. "Help me move them together." They strained against the immense weight of the solid oak benches, dragging them one by one and wedging them against the main doors, creating a formidable barricade. The hammering outside grew more frantic, punctuated by Thorne's enraged shouts. Then came a new sound, a rhythmic, splintering thud. They were using a battering ram. The ancient doors, which had stood for a century, groaned in protest. Dust rained down from the doorframe. Splinters of wood flew into the sanctuary. The storm broke in full fury. Rain lashed against the stained glass windows, the faces of the saints looking down on the chaos with serene indifference. Each impact of the ram was like a heartbeat, counting down their final moments. Silas grabbed two heavy iron candle holders from the altar. He handed one to Alara. "If they break through, stay behind me," he said, his voice low and intense. He looked at his own hands, calloused and scarred, as if seeing them for the first time in years. "God asks for peace," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "But sometimes he requires his shepherds to have the fangs of wolves." The ram struck again and again. A long crack appeared in the center of the right door. Outside, Thorne laughed, a triumphant, cruel sound. "It's over, priest. There is nowhere left for you to hide." Seeing the doors begin to fail, Thorne's patience finally snapped. His voice rose to a fever pitch, consumed by madness. "If the devil will not come out of his house, we will burn it down around him." Torches were brought forward. The smell of pitch and oil filled the air. They began to thrust the flames against the splintered wood of the barricaded doors. The threat that had begun with Alara at the stake had now come for them both. Fire, Thorne's favorite tool of purification and terror, began to consume their only shield. Orange light flickered through the cracks, and the acrid smell of burning oak filled the nave. Smoke, thick and black, began to pour into the sanctuary. Alara choked, her eyes streaming, the primal terror of being burned alive returning with suffocating force. This was not a house of God anymore. It had become a tomb. The smoke thickened, clinging to the high ceilings like a death shroud. Silas tore a strip of cloth from an altar boy's surplice, soaked it in the holy water from the baptismal font, and gave it to Alara. "Breathe through this," he ordered, his voice strained. The grim irony was lost on neither of them. The sacred water, meant for blessing and purification, was now their only defense against the unholy fire set by the town's own leader. But it wasn't enough. The main doors were now a wall of flame, and the heat was becoming unbearable. Despair, cold and sharp, began to pierce through Silas's resolve. He had failed. He had brought her to a sanctuary only to watch it become her pyre. But Alara, who had been a victim for so long, found a new strength born of desperation. Her gaze darted around the smoke-filled church, searching for any escape. Her eyes landed on a small, unassuming door tucked away in the shadows behind the main altar. It was a door she had noticed days ago. One Silas had said led to the old, disused belfry. "Silas!" she cried, her voice cutting through the roar of the fire. The bell tower. It was a desperate gamble, a fool's hope, but it was all they had. While Silas continued his futile attempt to beat back the flames with a heavy velvet runner torn from the aisle, Alara scrambled toward the altar. The small door was stiff, its iron hinges rusted, but she threw her entire body against it. It groaned open into a narrow, dark spiral staircase choked with cobwebs and dust. Without a moment's hesitation, she began to climb. Outside, Thorn and his men watched the church burn, their faces illuminated by the demonic glow. The main doors were now glowing cherry red, about to collapse. Thorn's victory was at hand. He raised his hand to signal the final assault. But then a new sound pierced the night, a sound that was not the roar of fire or the howl of the storm. It was a clear, urgent, metallic ringing. Ying yong ying yong. It was not the deep, sonorous peal of the main church bell, but the higher, frantic clang of the small, forgotten Angelus bell from the old tower. The sound cut through the chaos, a desperate plea broadcast across the entire town. In their homes, the people of the town heard it. They had hidden from the storm, from Thorn's madness, from their own shame. But they knew that bell. Silas had told them its story once. It was only to be rung in the direst of emergencies, a call for help when all other hope was lost. An elderly baker, a man to whom Silas had often given a spare loaf from the church's small charity, was the first to open his door. Then a widow, whose leaking roof the priest had spent an entire day patching, stepped into the rain-swept street. One by one, lights appeared in windows. Doors creaked open. The townspeople began to emerge, their fear finally eclipsed by a greater fear, the fear of their own cowardice. They converged on the square, a silent, grim-faced crowd, their numbers swelling until they dwarfed Thorn's collection of paid thugs. The mercenaries hesitated, their loyalty bought with coin, not conviction. They were prepared to fight a priest and a girl, not an entire town. Seeing his power base dissolving before his very eyes, Thorn faltered. It was the only opening Silas needed. With a roar that was more lion than man, he threw his shoulder against the burning barricade, sending the weakened, charred doors crashing outward into the muddy square. He emerged from the smoke and embers, his face black with soot, his cassock scorched, his eyes blazing with a fire far hotter than the one Thorn had set. He no longer looked like a priest. He looked like an avenging angel. He strode directly toward the stunned mayor. "Your rule is over, Thorn," Silas boomed, his voice resonating with all the power and fury he had kept buried for years. He pointed a trembling finger at the mayor. "This man told you he was protecting you from a witch. He was protecting his own greed. He murdered Alara's parents for their land and tried to burn her when she would not yield to his lust." Just then, Alara appeared from the church, her face smudged but her gaze as steady as the stone beneath her feet. She stood at Silas's side, a silent testament to his truth. "He speaks the truth," she said, her voice ringing with newfound courage. I saw the look in his eyes the day my parents died. I see that same look in his eyes now. The crowd surged forward, their shame now curdled into a righteous rage. Thorn's enforcers melted away into the darkness, leaving him alone and exposed. He saw the faces of the people he had terrorized for years now turned against him. His power, an illusion built on fear, had vanished. With a pathetic cry, he turned and fled into the night, a coward swallowed by the darkness he had created. As the storm passed and the first clean rays of dawn broke over the horizon, a small group remained. Silas and Alara stood before the scarred but standing church. With them were the baker, the widow, and a dozen other souls who had found their courage in the ringing of a small bell. They were no longer just a priest and a fugitive, no longer just a collection of frightened townspeople. They were a family, forged in fire and bound by a shared act of defiance. The church was damaged, but it would be rebuilt, its scorched doors a permanent reminder that a true sanctuary is not made of wood or stone, but of the courage one finds in the heart of another. What is the true measure of a sanctuary? Is it found within consecrated walls and beneath a steeple that reaches for the heavens? Or is it something far more profound, something built not of stone, but of spirit? Is it the unshakable resolve in a protector's eyes, or the quiet courage of a soul that refuses to be extinguished? We've all faced moments where standing up for what is right felt like standing alone in a storm. Moments where our own fear threatened to drown out the small, quiet voice of our conscience. But courage, like fire, can spread from one heart to another, until it becomes a blaze that can burn down the walls of tyranny and light the way to a new dawn. When was the last time you were a sanctuary for someone in need? When did you offer shelter from the storm, not with a roof and walls, but with your voice, your strength, your belief in them? These are the moments that define us. These are the stories that truly matter. Tell us your story in the comments below. Share a time when you stood for someone, or when someone stood for you. And if you believe in the unbreakable power of the human spirit to rise from the ashes, then like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories that remind us of the light we can all be in the darkness.